Okay, Allison.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate, as always, your time and interest in helping us to continue to refine the UDO. We've got one new member today. I wanted to just give a second just to say your name and affiliation. So Joseph, if you don't mind, I didn't tell you this is going to happen, but I just thought I'd do it real quick.
Yeah, hi. My name's Joseph Margolis. I am I live in the Derrida area, which for anyone who needs reference to that, it's um, like I'd say a little, um, it's kind of between it's in the Mallard Creek Road, Sugar Creek Road area, and I live on the part of it that was once Rumpel Road until the new University City extension was built, and so my part of Rumpel Road became University City, and so I'm here, I guess, just as part of the Dorada Statesville Association, just to just listen, find out what's going on, and sort of give voice to concerns as needed from the perspectives of people in my community.
Thanks, Joseph. Um, well, great. Well, thank y'all again for being here today. So we're in deep in some considerations and discussions around things related to residential development. And so we're going to send out the survey responses, and I really appreciate you all doing that. We'll send them out after this meeting. But what we really want to focus on is the conservation development standards today. So we presented in front of the Transportation Planning and Development Committee on Monday to let them know that we were considering changes and looking at and wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what those look like and why we were considering them. And so that's what we really want to focus on today. Sorry, I keep getting like people entering the waiting room. It's like the little ding dongs are distracting sometimes. So we've got a presentation that we want to share with you. And again, we really want you, we're trying not to talk too much at you, but want to give you some context about what we're seeing and why we're recommending changes, and really make sure that we have an opportunity for you all to give us some feedback. Again, this group and the purpose of this group is to really provide staff with some early feedback before we get into public engagement and city council conversations and talking to their planning commissioners, et cetera. So we really value your perspectives that you bring, whether you work in the field or you're a community member. I think all are really important to these conversations. So Alan, if you could pull up the presentation. You can just go to the next slide. So in the UDO today, there is something called a conservation residential development option. This is something that has been around in the planning world for a long time. Some people call it cluster development, conservation subdivision. There's lots of different names for it. But the idea is that you allow for a reduction in development standards in exchange for additional conservation of open or green space. So one of the things to start with, the making sure you understood the original intent of this is we have base standards in the ordinance for how subdivisions are developed, and this is an option that people can pursue. And so we're really wanting, as we talk about what the amendment, the details look like, we also want to make sure that people understand what the original intent is. And so there's some language that we're proposing to add just to frame the conversation, that, again, to really highlight the importance of conserving natural areas, maintaining and enhancing tree canopy, protecting natural areas, and providing usable common open space for residents. And this is in exchange for reducing the minimum lot size for additional residential yield. Next slide. So this is again is a development option available in some neighborhood 1 zoning districts, and in our UDO, it allows you to reduce the lot size by 50% in exchange for additional open space. What we have found is since the UDO went into effect and we're seeing submissions, about 90% of the projects that are being submitted are using these standards. And as we're seeing so what we've been doing is from the planning department is we sit down and as a department, from our long range team who develops a comprehensive plan to our UDO team who develops the UDO, and then our land development and permitting team who is the one reviewing all these site plans. We sit down and we look at these all together and really talk about, are we getting what we envisioned by our comprehensive plan? And then if not, where do we potentially need to make changes? And so this is something that we've been talking about internally for a few months, that we would like to propose additional standards that really speak to increasing the quality and the quantity of open space requirements and increasing the transitions and public street requirements. So in this particular slide, I'll point out just a couple things, and then when I turn it over to Alan, he can kind of walk through some additional examples. But you can see here, in the proposed subdivision that's on the right, you've got duplex units that are right adjacent to the backyards of the existing subdivision. And so the first thing that we've been thinking about is we need some additional transition area between the proposed subdivision and the existing subdivision, just to create some graduation there. There's also a number of alleys, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That you can see there, there's just one public street that's sort of with the T of it, and then with a bunch of alleys fed off of that. And we've got some common open space that's in there, and some of which is fairly small, that are separating the units that we think really need to be more pronounced. Next slide. So what staff feels is that we think that what we're getting in terms of the quantity of green area, which is, so a lot of people know that as tree save, but in the ordinance we call it green area, and common open space is not an adequate trade-off for the reduction in lot sizes that we're seeing. We're getting some of the tree save placed on private lots instead of common areas. We're seeing lots facing on stormwater facilities, lots facing on a narrow open spaces at the edge of the development. Again, narrow open spaces that we're really wanting to be higher quality, and just not a clear commitment to quality usable open space. Showed you sort of that missing transition that we think that is needed between conservation development, abutting adjacent properties, and then really wanting to make sure that we're adequately preparing the community for access by our emergency vehicles. The alleys at times don't have the same requirements for street trees and a full sidewalk system, concerns about multiple driveways close to each other, and then making sure that we can service the development by solid waste and recycling. So those are some of the things we're seeing. We did survey you all again, as I mentioned, and we can provide the details of that after the meeting. And I mean, as expected, I don't think it was a surprise to us that the responses are pretty mixed, that there were some members that wanted to maintain the additional density, some members wanted higher standards, and our recommendation, again, to council on Monday, was to discuss these changes with you all during our March meetings. And so you can see some of the quotes over there that it's hard to see without the actual language. So when you're talking ordinance stuff, the devil's in the details, because each number and word is very impactful because it has a regulatory consequence. So the words are very important. Some comments of increased setback buffers and tree save areas should be integrated to improve transitions between densities and housing types. And then last comment here I'll share is to change open space requirements in transition areas that'll increase costs and reduce density that will impair the fundamental charge of the 2040 comp plan, which was to create equity in housing by making affordable and attainable housing more abundant. So again, we weren't surprised, but we still want to discuss the changes that we're recommending with you all that serve the overall intent of what the conservation option was, while recognizing that even if the standards become higher and maybe the lot yield is reduced from where it is today, it's still a significant increase in density than what we had before the UDO went into effect. So I believe at that point, I'm turning things over to Alan.
Thank you, Allison. The next several slides that I'll go over with you are subdivision sketch plans that have been submitted to us, and these were shared by our subdivision section, some of which would probably be approvable under our current conservation development standards, and others would not. But the purpose of going over these with you is just to show you what we're seeing come in our doors for new subdivisions using this conservation residential development option, and some of the concerns that we have with some of these. So the first one, you can see the areas highlighted in green are the common open space. And so it's broken up, and there isn't really any usable centrally located open space that would serve all of these residential units. So that's an issue that we are greatly concerned with. At the lower part of the plan, you can see that there are some units, triplexes, that open onto a stormwater pond, which is not necessarily what we're looking for. And we have a lot of alleys. I've labeled most of the alleys just so that you'll be able to see which are alleys and which are streets. And so we have a lot of alleys that have triplexes, each with what looks to be maybe a double wide driveway opening onto these alleys. So the issue that we have with alleys, one of them is that they're not walkable. And so if this is the only street that services your units, and you need to walk somewhere, you may be walking down an alley with no sidewalks, fairly narrow. It doesn't offer any on-street parking the way a public street might allow for. So it is just an alley that really is made up of driveways. Our emergency services sometimes have some issues with reaching residential buildings through a network of alleys. They tend to be narrower with sharper corners that some of the larger fire trucks may have a hard time navigating. So that's what we're seeing here. A lot of the site plans that I'm going to be sharing, sketch plans, are going to have similar issues, but we'll go through them. And if you have some questions or comments, you can enter them in the chat, and if they are indeed a question, we can stop and try to address it, or we'll wait until the end when we go through all of these, and then we can always go back and look at some issues that we've had. Here's another one. This is a couple of details on a much larger sketch plan, so you're not seeing the whole thing, but we just kind of zoomed into a couple of areas to illustrate a couple of concerns. So the part on the right, the section on the right, we really want to call out that the heavy line that you see at the top and left represents a proposed retaining wall, which is 14 feet in height, and it sets those triplex units up above 14 feet above the creek to the left, and there's a stormwater pond facility to the top of the plan. So what we end up with is some units where your front door is 14 feet above the open space that you're supposed to be conserving or preserving. So we're not really getting any benefit from that open space. And again, we have a lot of alleys here with not a lot of usable open space. And the inset on the right, we're illustrating here how the edge of the left edge of this section has an alley serving those triplex units, but the alley is up against the backyards of some residential properties without much of a transition area. And so people's backyards are potentially exposed to an alley and the backs of the garage doors of these triplex units. Our next is, again, similar. It has some good open space. In particular, I think some of the open space at the top half of this plan in green. The open space at the bottom, though, is probably not what we're looking for. It's a thin strip that kind of goes along the edge of the street and doesn't really seem to serve a purpose as usable open space that would be accessible and usable for much. We've got some units that are facing onto a stormwater facility, which is not what we're looking for. We don't have any transition to the adjacent neighborhood, especially up in that right-hand corner, the far right, where the arrow is pointing. You've got the side wall of a triplex that is potentially 5 feet off the property line into somebody's backyard. And so not much of a transition there. And then again, a preponderance of alleys with all of the issues that we've mentioned, that we've got some concerns with alleys. Another with some open space that looks like it is fairly centrally located and may be usable for the residents of this particular subdivision. But we've got these in the middle of the plan, long, thin strips of open space with units fronting onto it. And we're not sure how usable this open space would be. So we do have a requirement in the current ordinance that requires that open space be at least 30 feet wide, which is, I think, what this has been designed for. But whether that is wide enough and whether we want these long, thin strips of open space is something that we are discussing. We also have some units at the top where the arrow is pointing to. We have triplex units with individual driveways onto a public street, which under our current driveway ordinance requirements rather wouldn't be allowed. So there are a couple of things in this site plan that would make it not approvable even under our current standards. Go to the next one, which is again triplex and duplex units. We do have some public streets here, but we also have a number of alleys, which may or may not be an issue of this plan as much as they are with some others. However, the problem that we're facing here is that the open space is along the bottom edge of the neighborhood, and whether or not it is really quality and usable open space is something that we can discuss. We don't think it is. We're looking for the open space that's provided to be accessible and usable by residents, and the kind of open space that we're sometimes seeing, in particular that strip along the bottom here, doesn't seem to fit with the desire that it be usable and accessible to the residents. So again, we've got a lot of triplexes here with individual driveways that are opening onto alleys. We've got some duplexes and along this street here at the bottom, this cul-de-sac street with driveways that may or may not meet the requirements. And then we've got some triplex units over on the left-hand side that front onto Jimmy Ayler Road with individual driveways, which would, well, actually, I'm sorry, I apologize. Those aren't driveways. The driveways are on the back alley. I should mention that in addition to common usable open space, the conservation residential development option also requires a certain amount of green area or tree save area. So you can see some of that in this particular plan, which is around the top edge of the site. Is some areas that they have carved out as their tree save. Our next site plan is a small subdivision of duplexes. Looks like 10 duplexes. They are fronting onto public streets. They do have some alleys that serve them. However, the issue that we want to point out with this is that they have put their common open space between the front door, if you will, of these duplexes and the street. And they've done that to enable them to reduce this is getting a little deep into the weeds of the ordinance, but the current ordinance says that even though you may be allowed to reduce your lot size by 50%, if you front on a public street at the perimeter of your subdivision, you cannot do that. You have to keep the lot size the same as the underlying zoning district, whether it's N1A or N1B or so forth. So this creative designer has put some common open space in between the street and the units so that these units are not fronting on the public street, and therefore they can reduce the lot size by 50%. So technically, I think legal, but probably not what we expected to see. Couple more. Again, the issue that we've got with this is that we've got triplexes that are all accessed by alley for driveways and garages, and our common open space is on the edges of this property where there really isn't very accessible to the residents, and doesn't really seem to be centrally located or serve a useful purpose other than to meet the minimum standards of the ordinance. We're showing this example, which, you know, it does have a public street, and we are serving these triplexes and duplexes with an alley network. But one of the big problems that we are seeing here is indicated by the arrow in the call out text. These residential properties to the upper left of the screen, just off of the property line, we've got the triplex and duplex units with their sidewalls that are very close to the backyards of the existing residential buildings, probably single family homes, I don't know for certain, without any sort of transition, any distance. So that's an issue that we've been talking about, whether or not we need to do something to address that. And this is the last of these sketch plans, and then we can go back and we can look in the comments or open up the meeting for conversation if you want to go back and look at some of these others. But this final site plan that I'll cover has got a similar issue. You can see at the bottom where we've got the sides of duplex units right up against the backyards of what look to be single family homes without any sort of a transition area. Although this plan does seem to have a good piece of usable open space over toward the left of the plan, but it does have some of those long, thin strips of open space that don't really seem to serve much of a useful purpose. So this plan has got some good things, but some issues as well, and they also make ample use of alleys to serve the driveways of these triplexes. So I believe, yep, let me go back because I believe that that is all of the sketch plans that we have. And so we can go back and take a look at the comments, and Allison or Laura, if you want to jump into the conversation, Josh as well, Josh from our subdivision section. And I can read, well, let me just read through the comments. I don't know if you're all seeing the comments. We don't have a lot so far, but let me read you the ones we have. Eric commented probably on that first plan that didn't think it was a very good design. Carolyn agreed. Joseph, can you please show a couple of site plans that represent good examples of how open space should be incorporated? We'd like to be able to do that, Joseph. We don't have any in the current presentation, but we're working toward trying to figure out what those good examples could look like.
Alan, I would say just on the one that we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
You can see there is a very large open space, access from the public street that people are facing out onto. And I think that's a pretty good example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Lauren.
Hey, Alan, this is Kevin. I'm going to step in here just briefly and ask. I know the next comment I think is John Morris's, and it's pretty lengthy. John, if you're willing and able, if you want to come off mute and maybe express some of your feedback, that'd be good. And then we've got several people queued up with raised hands.
Yeah, all the things that Allison and Alan were mentioned are very subjective criteria. You know, is a long strip that faces a lot of houses better than, you know, a square park that faces, you know, fewer houses, or, you know, but to me, there's subjective things, and we've really already legislated those things. We've gone through it for 7 years and created a formula in the way that you would alleviate almost all of those concerns, which I listed some of in my comment, is to reduce density, reduce the number of units, which I really like. If you do a space that's somehow subjectively acceptable to the regulators, which is a Pandora's box, but if you do create regulations, like if you do create a space that's subjectively acceptable to the regulators, then you lower, or you reduce the width of the lot, which creates more density. So if in solving for these subjective issues, you can create more units, then I'm a big fan. But the goal of regulation is to provide a concrete, objective set of criteria that then the professionals, the architects, the engineers, the developers can design product to meet the market. And you know, the market is really the people who are moving here, or who are relocating, downsizing, upsizing, and whatever. And to the extent that we create less units where our existing infrastructure is, we force those units outside of the existing infrastructure. We create longer commutes and we create sprawl, while reducing the affordability within the city. And we're seeing that now as housing prices are going up, because it's hard to sell your house because you got a 3% interest rate. You don't want to move to a 7% interest rate, and that drives pricing up. This does the same thing. If there's less units available, then housing will become less attainable. And we really have to figure out what our goals are. And you know, do we want to respond to every comment from a neighbor? Because if I lived in a neighborhood, I would probably not like this in my backyard either. Or do we want to create a rational, objective set of criteria that the professionals can then design to meet the market? And I really think we're getting outside. We're starting to color outside of the lines when we go into these subjective areas.
So if I can respond to that, what I want everyone to remember is that these aren't the base standards. So we're not adding additional criteria or describing things that are for what's in the base UDO, which now has no density and allows triplexes everywhere. This is the development option in which you get to reduce your lot sizes by 50%. And so I think that's the important distinction that we need to remember here, is that there's something that is being given and we think the trade-off is not right-sized. And so if there's something that is prohibitive within the base UDO standards, then we can talk about that. But I think what we're finding is that we have all of the development going this direction because you are able to put more density. And I understand, and I certainly believe the density is important, but I don't think that the allowances for what you get to do here are correctly right-sized with the benefits that should be provided. And that's what we really were trying to find the balance. If this is a tool that is appropriate in the UDO, what are the standards that are more appropriate? I think, okay, so we go to the queue now?
Yeah, Matt has entered a comment also, which I can read, or, Matt, since we're doing this, you want to just jump in?
Sure. I guess my one comment, I know there's been several references to like this image right here, where you've got a inadequate transition between the side elevation of a building and the rear elevation of the adjacent lot. I mean, I don't, when you're looking at the side elevation of a triplex or duplex, I don't think that it's materially different from what a single family would be. I think it has more to do with traditionally the lots would back up to one another. So you'd have a rear yard and a rear yard butting up to one another. And with these driveway restrictions on some of the attached product, forcing alleys for this type of layout, what's happening is instead of that being, grass and trees in a backyard behind a structure, you now have an alley with parking and vehicular space. So I don't know. I just, a side elevation to a side yard to a rear yard orientation, I think is agnostic to whether it's single family detached or attached. That's all.
Yeah, if I can just give my thoughts on that. Currently in our neighborhood one, and most other residential districts, the side yard is 5 feet minimum. So you could have technically houses that are 10 feet apart, sidewall to sidewall. But even in those underlying districts, your rear yard setback is typically anywhere from 40 to down to 25 feet or 35 feet, and so you would have a, backyard to backyard relationship where your dwellings would be, significant distance apart from each other. And so here with the sidewall, with a 5-foot side yard for that duplex where the arrow is pointing, that building gets much closer to that single family house to the south of it than what you would normally see in a normal subdivision. So I think I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's apples to apples.
Well, I don't disagree with maybe that's a new relationship, but I think it's irrelevant to duplex or triplex. Anyway, that's all.
Okay. John, you're the first name I see who had your hand up, please.
Okay, thank you. Probably have a couple questions first. These are all in an N1 mapped area, is that correct?
Yes, the only zoning districts that this is available are the N1A through D.
Okay. Did we have, I know we had subdivisions before. Do we have anything like this in the old ordinance?
Yes, we did. It was a cluster subdivision option.
Okay, yeah, I remember those. Okay. Well, I fully understand the staff's concern and Al's concern with what they're seeing, because I think the design is incredibly insensitive, but it's probably really brilliant in that they have taken the rules they were given and figured out how to make this work. If I were czar, I would ask council to stop this entire whatever it's called, construction area, I would stop this in conservation development until you figure it out. Because if you go to the very first slide, I don't think any of these look at all like the description of what the idea behind conservation districts were. If you go to the very first slide, where it frankly looks like a little village in the mountains, permits a reduction in minimum lot size in exchange for provision and conservation of green area and common open space to protect open space and our natural resources and features. I haven't seen any of those drawings that have natural resources or features that are being saved. What I see is a lot of green, although I think there were some gray areas maybe not described to us. I see a lot of green that's being put in places to make the plan work. I'm really not seeing preserving what's there. And I thought the thrust of this entire thing was if you had a piece of property with really terrific trees and natural features, we're not going to make you tear it all down to put in units X feet apart, facing a street, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't see that in anything you've gotten so far, and therefore I would understand the concern. I will tell you personally, I'm really tired of hearing about 45,000 people a year coming and we have to destroy every neighborhood to make it work. I think we know they're coming, but we're also seeing single family becoming 8 and 10, 12 units. So we're building density. We need density. There's no question. But I think that what you're seeing here is not what you intended, not what the Planning Commission intended as we discussed this for 6 years. And I frankly would put this entire conservation thing on hold until it is redone, and then developers know precisely what the new standards are, because you figured out what doesn't work. And the reason I'm saying that is every month developers come in and tell city council and all of us what doesn't work on the UDO when they want to make changes to it. And yet the other side of it is, well, we've done all this work on the UDO, so don't now change something unless we want it. That's just not fair. I'm sort of tired of the development only side of the UDO. So thank you for holding this meeting and letting me talk. I'm very concerned by what you're seeing, and I think we need to work on this. We really need to get it right. And Allison, thank you to Alan and Laura and everyone for bringing this up. And, sometimes you can't get it right the first time. God's in the details. I think the details here are wrong, my view. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Allison, did you want to say anything before we move on?
No, I'm here to listen.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah, John, in fairness, you did point out that we didn't necessarily call out that some of these site plans are preserving existing tree save area, and we didn't particularly highlight those. There is a requirement for a certain amount of green area or tree save in some of these plans, and I don't know them specifically whether they're tree save that's existing that they're preserving, or whether it's tree save that's being created to meet the requirement. So
Right.
Thank you for that comment.
The one in front of you right now, for instance, if all of that gray area up there, which I can barely read, if that's tree save and it's like a big park, that throws a different shade on this.
Yeah.
But I
And
can't tell.
I don't know the site, and maybe there's somebody on here who does, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Nate, you were next on my list of
John, I don't have my glasses on, but I think it says tree save. I squint really hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm seeing tree save as well.
it's
It does.
I have my glasses on, so I'm
Yeah.
seeing tree save.
So, question, how much of the city is zoned N1A to N1D?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but it's
How
a
much?
significant portion.
is in
I
the
mean, it's
N-
probably 60 to 70%.
So I'm going to take a little different spin on this. I think what the market is telling you is that your base N1 standards are not producing the product that residents can afford. And so I don't know how you open up a discussion about conservation districts. It might be every project you're getting in the doors because nobody can build on a 70-foot wide lot without asking someone to buy $1 million home. And I am guessing here, but I don't know how there's not more economics and data in what you're presenting, because there is a lot of technical solutions here. I totally agree with a lot of these items, transitions, better common open space, but we're also leaning towards, if it's 60 to 70%, it sounds like that'd be at a moratorium on 60 to 70% of development in our city if you all aren't getting any submittals on your base N1 zoning districts. So this is an issue about, it's not about 45,000 people moving here. It's about nobody's reselling their homes, and the only product for people to buy is new homes. I mean, home prices have gone up, median home prices have gone up. They've doubled in the last 5 years or whatever it's been. So it's not just an affordability or density question. It's about what the community and what type of product, what type of home prices our community needs with the right design regulations. And if we're at two opposite ends of the spectrum and there's nothing in the middle, then we're just never going to have it. It's going to kill everything. So I would push hard that there needs to be a lot more data behind this. And if we're going to open up significant changes outside of design tweaks, that it needs to be on the entire N1 district.
Thank you, Nate. Eric, you're next. And then I've got Carolyn and Joseph, I think. Yep. Okay. So Eric, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Alan. First of all, I just want to connect the dots here. I think that I had a hard time trying to figure out what was really happening with these subdivisions, because they were supposed to be a one neighborhood, N1A, and they were really much smaller. It makes perfect sense now why all of this has made the attention of the council, because 90% of them were, taking an N1A and converting it to basically a C, or actually it's smaller than a C. And then the N1Cs were going from Cs to Es, right? So using this particular conservation district, right? So the answer, I think, is, and I understand some of the concerns that were just made, have to relate to actually rezoning these parcels to a more appropriate zoning district, not subverting what they're zoned at currently, using the subdivision ordinance, and then using this type of development to basically undo what those parcels were originally zoned. I think with the community area planning and then preemptively taking that policy map and then rezoning that will be occurring some point later this year or next year will hopefully help. But I think we got to take into account that maybe, part of what the developers are saying may be true, but using this kind of loophole to go over what is currently zoned there is not the right way to do it either. So, I mean, we're all for density in the right places. Problem is, this is not doing that. It's overriding that. So we have to get the parcels that are on the ground rezoned in the right places to allow more density to occur. I think that's going to be the answer. We're going to have to do it as a community. We can't let something that's kind of being misused here out of maybe it's, out of what it was originally intended for. Not meant to be used 90% of the time. That doesn't make sense. Something has to be done. If it's a pause on this type of stuff, or something that needs to be done short term, that makes sense as kind of a way of reevaluating this. So that might be a solution to do. But we really need to get the zoning correct on the ground to really, I think, solve this problem.
Eric, thank you. Carolyn, you're up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm in agreement with what the city staff is proposing. And I'm also in agreement with what maybe John's proposing, that maybe do a stop on the conservation till we can get the tweaking of the words and definitions right or corrected. My understanding is the 2040 and UDO, even though UDO is regulations and it was approved, everything the city council and city staff has said from the get-go is that both are living documents, and as we go along, you're going to find little loopholes or things that need to be tweaked, and we've seen that with the UDO amendments all since it became imposed here. And so I understand we've got all these people moving to Charlotte and that, and I also understand that neighborhood ones are predominantly across Charlotte, but not all neighborhood ones across Charlotte, because if you look in East Side and West Side, aren't going to be your $1 million homes, so you're not going to have affordable housing. Part of the density is supposed to be to help have different housing types to provide for more affordability. But at the same time, we have to have the quality of life, and that's what the UDO and the 2040 plan envisioned that I know of. And we're going to have to do some tweaking, and it's not against the density in any way, shape, or form, but we have to provide a quality of life and safety for anyone and everyone that buys a home in Charlotte and can have a home in Charlotte. So that's, I am in favor of the proposed changes that Allison, you and your staff are proposing. Thank you.
Okay, Carolyn, thank you for those comments. Joseph, I see your hand up. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
All right. Just a quick clarification from somebody on here. I don't come from a planning or development background, but my lay understanding of just reducing the size of a given space is that you have less space to contain more to contain items than you would if you had that original space. So if I'm hearing that trade-off of better placed community conservation zones means that they get to reduce the scale of their, does that mean, is that going to impact the scale of the required developments or the required units? Like I'm counting on this property pictured here, a total of 159 units if I just counted them. And so if such a plan to more appropriately place these conservation zones is the trade-off? Because often these things, there's always a trade-off. You're giving up one type of benefit for another. So is the trade-off that you're giving up less housing? You're gonna trade off and give up more housing to have just a community that better places these conservation spaces so they can be useful benefits, amenities for the neighborhood. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, let me try to answer that. What you're getting is a reduction in the minimum lot size. So for example, if this were a neighborhood 1A and N1A zoning district, it would ordinarily have a minimum lot size of, I believe, 70,000 square feet. And it would have a certain minimum lot width. If you use this conservation development option, you could reduce the lot size by half and also your minimum lot width by half. I'm not suggesting that all of these lots have done that. But the density would be relatively similar to if you had just developed this without the conservation development. These units would just be spread more evenly throughout the subdivision rather than grouped together with a significant amount of tree safe green area and open space. And so the N1A zoning district and our neighborhood one zoning districts don't have any requirements to provide common open space. They just have individual yards, front yards, backyards, but no common open space. So this option lets you reduce the lot size. You can still build a single family house on that lot if you can meet the setback requirements, or a duplex or a triplex, just as you'd be able to build without this option. But this option requires some open space in tree save areas that are over and above what would be required without it. So the density is, I think, almost a wash. Maybe somebody can correct me on that, but I think it's we're not getting a significant greater density using this option. It's just a way of how it's laid out. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong about density, but my thinking is maybe a little bit more density with this, but not a significant increase.
Okay, I guess, my comments here are, I just feel like I have a lot to learn. Just so, I'm gonna be looking to talk to some developers I know, to get some clarification, as well from their point of view. And at this point, I'm gonna reserve a whole lot of significant comments because I just feel like I need to level up a little bit more on, some of my knowledge, and I don't want to speak. But at this point, I feel like I can safely say, in my own opinion, that just I'm I'm having a hard time envisioning that. I think it looks like these designs are poorly designed for community use, like for the community benefits of those conservation spaces. I see where the city, where the planners are coming from with bringing this. But I'm skeptical about the density being a nominal change. And I say that with the idea that I'm open-minded to having my skepticisms assuaged by talking to people who are more expert in these in developing site plans. And I'll reach out to at least one of my contacts after this meeting, and we'll have better insight. But it just seems like if you're allowing less space, I don't know. It just seems like it could potentially affect density. And I look forward to learning more from some of my colleagues.
Thank you, Joseph. Well, for your first meeting, you certainly jumped into a kind of a hornet's nest here. So welcome to the club.
Glad to be here.
There are several comments in the chat that are too long for me to read. So it seems like we've started with, well, I don't know if you want to just read those. I don't really want to get into an argument about some of the points that are being made. I think you can read that for yourself. And then if you've got any reaction to anything that you're reading in chat, please raise your hand and we'll talk about it.
So, I mean, I'm just skimming the comments here. And I want to comment on what Nate said about the based in one standards. I mean, I said that early on that, I mean, it does tell you something when people are going one direction. And it's hard to distinguish whether or not it's because the door that people are going through is so much easier that that's the natural place to go. Or if there is something that needs to be reevaluated with the base standards. And I think both are things that we need to consider, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, the density discussion, it seems to be something that we're talking about more and more. When we transitioned from our old zoning ordinance, which had maximum density standards for residential development, to the UDO, we got rid of all minimum density requirements in favor of just allowing certain uses in certain districts. So for our N1 districts, we would allow single-family duplex and triplexes by right. If the building fit on the lot, it was allowed without regard to density, to overall density. And that was following the policies of the comprehensive plan, which we then translated into regulations with the UDO. But this particular issue and others seem to have brought back some concerns among some people about whether or not we should revisit density. I don't know that that's something that we really want to get back to. But again, that's up to our elected officials and our leadership to try to give us direction on that. Just kind of scanning the other comments that have come
Yeah,
in.
sorry, Alan, I had my hand up real quick, just to respond to that.
sorry.
Comment wasn't about density. The regulations back you into density. So when you have a minimum lot size and a minimum lot width in subdivision regulations and 15% tree save and 10% stormwater, you are creating a density on a project, whether you all state it or not. Those are based on, those lot widths and those lot dimensioners are based on the old R3, R4, R5 regulations. You took the 3 units to the acre off of it, but it's the same regulation. So that, you can disagree. That is my comment. It's not about bringing back densities. It's about the dimensional standards that create those densities.
Okay. When we created the new UDO neighborhood 1 districts, we did take the standards of the old residential districts, R3, R4, R5, and try to create an equivalent UDO neighborhood 1 district, so that if your home was in an R3 district and we were rezoning you, we weren't rezoning you to a much denser zoning district. We were allowing duplexes and triplexes where none were allowed before in your district, but we weren't shrinking the lot size of your existing neighborhood. But this, in essence, this conservation development option, in essence, does some of that to your, what used to be an R3 zoning district. And now with the addition of duplexes and triplexes as a permitted use, as well as the option to reduce lot sizes, you are in effect making, those existing R3, formerly R3 zoning districts a much denser product. So I get your argument. I'm not sure I completely am on board with it. But that was our rationale. I mean, we didn't want to translate previous R3 and R4 and R5 districts to a new UDO district that had much denser standards. So we tried to create an equivalency, but the additional density comes from the permitted uses now of the duplex and triplex, if you can fit them.
Eric, your hand is raised.
Yep. I was just curious with the other 10%, do we have examples of like subdivisions that went through not using the conservation district in an N1A? Do you have any of, I'm sure you don't know that right off the top of your head, but maybe for a follow-up meeting or something, just trying to figure out like what truly is the problem that's happening with these subdivisions. I mean, I think we could all agree it's not an individual parcel that's causing problems with duplexes, triplexes. as much as these subdivisions. Is that correct? That's really what's needs to be looked at.
I think there are a couple of different things that are, if these were developed without the conservation option, conservation residential development option, and just under our base zoning standards as a subdivision, lots would have to front a public street, and so you'd be limiting the number of lots that are fronting either open space or fronting being serviced by alleys. And so you would have more of your site taken up by public street right of way for one. You would not have a common open space requirement at all, so you wouldn't have to build in those common open spaces. You would have a tree save requirement of 15% or green area, as we call it now. So you would either have to preserve existing tree area or create 15% of the site. You would still have a stormwater management requirement that, according to our developers, it would typically take up 10% of your site. And so between tree save and stormwater taking up 25% of your site, and then you would have more street right of way rather than alleys, so that takes up more of your site. And then your lots would be bigger. So I guess the conclusion that I'm getting to is that you probably are getting more density using this option than you would if you, but Josh, I don't know if you're still on or not, from Josh Weaver from Subdivision. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I'm here. You know, you might not be getting more lots, but the lots that you are getting have triplexes on them. So, you know, it depends on how you define density, but if you're counting number of units, single family as opposed to 3-unit buildings, that's significantly, or it's more.
Right. Okay. And what would, just contrasting if this was neighborhood 1A, right, versus if it was a neighborhood 1DE, something like that, right?
Yeah, the lot sizes themselves get smaller, but when you do a conservation subdivision, you can reduce your width and size by half. So you're going from a, let's start it as a 70-foot lot, and now you're down to a 35-foot minimum lot width. So theoretically they get smaller, but then you put a triplex on it and it gets bigger. So people aren't using the minimum sizes, but you could go all the way down if you were doing single family to a 35-foot lot width.
Okay. Where it was originally supposed to be, you know, at least in the policy map and everything. Yeah, a neighborhood 1A, not the what we were assuming, even if it was just, you know, even if it was a duplex, triplex on there, but when you multiply it, the power of subdivision, and then use this, it really is changing the whole zoning of that area, what it was originally meant for, or breaking the policy map, basically, in a sense.
Theoretically.
I'm scrolling through comments, and I welcome you to also do the same. There's a lot of discussion about.
Alan, I believe John has his hand
yes.
raised if he'd like to make a comment.
Oh, yeah, thanks, John. Go ahead, John.
I can figure out what to press. I think I pressed the right thing. I think that John Morris's and Nate's last comments are really where we need to go. I know that you are probably under a time crunch with council, but we have pages of a document that are now, you're realizing, not giving us what you thought you were getting. You have different opinions on this committee, which is perfect that you would have that, and they're not seeing what they expected, either one direction or the other. And I think there are a lot of questions about affordability and what is density? Is it lot size? Is it unit size? Even that was raised. I sort of think we need to have some big meeting for an afternoon and have people in there that can say, if you did this, these units are going to be within 250 and 350, 100,000 a piece. If you do this, they're going to be 400 to $1 million. If you do this, you've added 40% in road cost. Because I don't think any one person on here, other than Nate with all the data they keep, I'm not sure anyone can really tell us that. And it seems we need to have that for the ordinance to be modified. Just, that's what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Yeah, Nate and Matt and maybe some others probably would be able to work that math for us, and I know they can.
Joseph has his hand raised also, Alan.
Oh, sorry.
Um,
Go ahead.
I actually want to comment that I live in a neighborhood that has poorly laid out community spaces. Like there used to be something called a greenway that they don't even call it a greenway. That was just like a place where you could walk your dogs. It was right next to a stormwater pond that was just abutted the property line. And so the units don't face each other on several parts of the property in this townhouse community I live in. So as someone who is experiencing this, I can see how this result is a problem. So it's not just I sympathize with it. I live with it, and so I definitely like John Friday's idea of like just sort of. I really like the idea of having some data that I can look at to sort of see what the trade-offs are in terms of cost to benefits. Like what do we lose in terms of housing inventory when we fully address this, or and so we can figure out, well, what are the most important priorities? Like I think having good sidewalks and houses facing the street and facing each other as much as possible is important aspect of it. But it's hard for me I know one of the bigger drivers of the UDO and the comprehensive plan is affordability. And I just don't, I don't feel like there's enough information in these slides for me to give my opinion on that part of it. So I'd like more information about affordability.
Any other thoughts? Or is there anybody who has made a written comment in chat that wants to expound on it? John Morris, you've said a couple of things. You want to jump in?
I couldn't endorse more what John Friday said, that respectful disagreement, is going to arrive at the correct solution. It's going to be a compromise. There is a push-pull between affordability and density. As Rob pointed out, council is ultimately the one that makes this decision based upon citizen feedback and staff recommendations. So, getting direction from them as to which is more important, and supporting it with data. Like, why wouldn't we refresh a study that was done in the past that shows the effect on affordability and the effects on density? And this is a great forum. I think staff, you guys do a tremendous job of presenting, presentations, and providing time for discussion. Y'all have evolved to the format of these meetings, but nothing substitutes for being in a room together and to spend hours, not an hour and a half, like to have due time with 3 or 4, as Matt Langston points out, 3 or 4 developers that understand the pro formas, 2 or 3 landscape designers, 2 or 3 civils, having 5 or 6 people up there that are subject matter experts, because we all have an opinion and we all have biases. But understanding what our opinions and biases do, to the issues that we're going to have to live with for a long time, because you can't have mass transit without density and without, population. And none of us want sprawl, none of us want to become Atlanta. So hitting the pause button, slow down, we don't have enough time. Hitting the pause button to really study this issue, getting the subject matter experts. I develop industrial buildings. I don't have any idea what a pro forma looks like for a triplex or a single family subdivision or any of these units. So I just endorse, I disagree with John on many of his points. I certainly respect him because he's got a long venerable career of being an architect. But let's get people in a room and hash this out, and so that we can give a nuanced recommendation to our council using real numbers in addition to to our opinion. Love the discussion. Thank you all so much for participating.
Thank you, John. Couple of comments since the last time I checked here. One from Joseph, one from Eric. Some good thoughts. We've had a very lively discussion. I don't know that we've got a lot to think about. Let me read a new comment from Rob also. So, Allison, I don't know if you want to give any thoughts on some of these ideas that are being put forth, or whether we want to think about them for a little while and get back. We've got 2 or 3 more slides to cover at the end of our presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I was just writing some thoughts down, and I mean, I think we probably just ending with what we have right now is probably the best place to end it. I don't think we had too much more. I think, yeah, I think at this point, Alan, we've kind of moved past this, so I think we're still talking about what potential changes could look like. So,
Okay.
So a few thoughts. We recognize as staff that we certainly need the designers in the room, because on the staff side, we are not designing site plans, and that is not our area of expertise. What we are here to do is to find ways to ensure that what we are asking people do goes back to the original vision that was outlined in the comprehensive plan, which was about housing options and housing diversity and housing affordability. And I think we all can agree on that. I mean, the old saying about devil in the details and, all of that is very true, because we don't think that a standard that we have currently in the UDO is meeting what that original vision was. As I said earlier, I do hear what a couple of you have said about the base standards, and that's certainly something that we will be taking a look at. I think I'm certainly interested in doing some kind of cost analysis, whether that's something that we do with a different consultant, but I think that that's also something that is appropriate as well. Whatever happens going forward, again, I don't think that the way things are written now is how we want development projects to be introduced into Charlotte. And so we've done a lot with the UDO. It's been trying to take a vision and trying to take a set of regulations that have really been right sized for Charlotte and try to balance all the priorities that we're hearing from council and the community about housing affordability and density and tree canopy and stormwater and flooding and all of those things. And so it's complicated, and we changed a lot very quickly with the UDO, and we are continuing to evaluate and know that we'll be making changes as we move forward. So appreciate the comments, and I think staff has a lot to think about. See a couple more hands that haven't talked yet, so I want to make sure that that everyone has a chance to put their thoughts in the room. So I think I saw Angela first.
Thank you, Allison. Definitely great discussion today. I think a lot of points that were brought up. I was going to ask, could we do maybe an invite session to invite some designers and like land planners to sort of come in and weigh in their thoughts with this, couple civil engineers, I'm thinking, just sort of extend that invitation out to have a little bit more folks who sort of, especially when you're looking at civil planning and things like that, to bring those guys in and some designers. I don't know what your thoughts are, but maybe just have like a session, maybe extended a session out. And I can even, from the contacts that I have, but I think that some of these people might be good people to be in the room to have the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's
I did know that.
Yep. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
couple people have brought that up, and I think just internally we need to just talk about how best to do something like that for it to be productive and mutually beneficial for everyone that would participate and win. And so we've heard that a couple times today, and I think that sounds like a good idea, and we'll get back to you all about how we will proceed.
And I was even suggesting to, because I heard that come up as well, but if it was potential, like with some of the folks who have projects submitted with the cities, like some of the folks that you guys probably already work with and have some things that have been submitted with different projects, maybe bring some of those firms in to have, just to sort of look for some direction from folks that we already have some relationships with.
Yeah, and I mean, and I saw Matt put something in the chat. I mean, there are some folks that are in this group that represent some of those design firms, and so I'm sure that they have some thoughts about how to incorporate those voices.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, because I was just a bit confused. I thought, because it was a little bit with the challenge of taking that, but I did understand. But I think some of the points that had me a little bit confused is exactly sort of what we're ultimately changing. From like almost like I want to make sure that I'm still like I'm not even really don't think that I'm clear on exactly the new changes that we want to happen versus what we have there. I think today honestly got me a little bit confused on what I thought was sort of some of the points that were brought up. So even if like our takeaway today, even if we could have maybe some points from you guys, here's some clarity of like sort of like from what we're doing and what, just y'all's take on what we were changing. I think just, a few points would help me. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Angela. Dennis. Dennis, did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, let's see if we can. Alan or somebody that's running this may need to unmute Dennis.
All participants have the ability to unmute via the platform, so it might be something local with him.
Okay. Well, Dennis, if you could maybe type in the chat or something, that would be helpful. All right. Any additional closing thoughts from anybody? All right. Well, yeah. We've been talking about duplexes and triplexes for a few years now and are continuing to talk about them. It's my favorite topic that I feel like I talk about every day. I appreciate the feedback, and again, we're trying to get to a place of making Charlotte a place where everyone can live, and they can live in the type of situation or housing type that they that meets their needs. And so it's not easy trying to balance all the competing priorities, and appreciate your feedback and patience as we continue to make sure that what we have in terms of regulations is meeting the vision that we all seek for Charlotte. So thank you for your time. We are planning to have another meeting on March the 28th. And so please mark your calendars and save that on your calendars, and we'll be back in touch with more information. We'll provide the survey responses to you. And as staff starts to work through recommendations, we will certainly make sure that this group is in the loop. So thank you again for your time, and we'll see you on the 28th.